So we've got Tim Beck. Tim is our VP of IT Strategy and Implementation. He is responsible for all of the IT strategic planning that we do, our enterprise project management, our IT operations, that means our help desk, desktop support, data centers, and corporate voice. He's been with Bell for 35 years and really played an integral role in the migration that we made in a seamless transition to a primarily mobile workforce. In addition, we have Leo Cronin. Leo is our VP and Chief Security Officer. Because of the demand right now around security around mobile devices, Leo is kind enough to share some time with us, but Leo is responsible for all the physical and cybersecurity across Cincinnati Bell and our entire organization, which spans Hawaiian Telecom, Onyx, Canada, CBTS, and Cincinnati Bell. Prior to this, Leo was with Reed Elsevier and LexisNexis and carries over 30 years of IT and network security experience. So Tim and Leo, thank you both very much for joining us today. I'm going to pass it over to you two, and I think Tim, you'll be kicking us off first.
Okay, great. Good morning, everybody. Good. Next slide, please. So I was asked to just cover two very simple things, and there's only 2 slides from me after this particular one. I was going to talk just a little bit about what we've done as a company in response to the pandemic. And just because I can't help it, that'll have a little bit of an spin to it. And then more specifically, what IT at Cincinnati Bell has done. What we've done that has worked fairly well to this point, and at least some things that we're still attempting to address. You can go to the next page, please. And from a corporate perspective, the first bullet point is certainly one of the most important things I think that Cincinnati Bell has done and has served us well in this capacity. So we had, before this, an established business continuity program. We have a playbook, we have key roles defined, we have representatives named. So long before we had to establish a crisis management team, we had that infrastructure in place, and it certainly came in handy for here. The next bullet point is also extremely important from my perspective. Our communications department, internal communications, and just the communication, the content that has gone out has also been extremely good and extremely helpful. I've bullet pointed a couple things here. We are receiving daily messages of a CEO blog from our CEO, Lee Puck. He is extremely candid, honest, and straightforward in everything that he's delivering. And for the most part, everything has been received by our employee base very positively, even though the content itself isn't always all that positive. Just the honesty and candor has been really well received. We also, if not on a daily, almost daily basis, receive updates from our HR and health services group. And in terms of the tools we're using, there's certainly nothing fancy with those 2 daily messages. We're just using, or those folks are using good old-fashioned Microsoft Outlook to deliver those messages. The third bullet point I mentioned, we have a communications department has also established a portal that allows our employee base to submit questions and also look at the questions that other folks have submitted and vote. It allows those questions, the most important questions, or the questions that our employee base feel are the most important, to vote and bubble up to the top. And senior executives and provide answers to that. And we're using a service from a company called Pigeonhole for that particular need. Next, we also have established pretty quickly a centralized portal that we could send all of our employees to that just has lots of different types of information around COVID-19 itself, and the company's response and just some helpful things. I've got a screenshot in front of me to try to show you that. I'll just read off some things that are on the screen today. There's a copy of our daily message from our CEO. There are links to travel guidelines, which is obviously very restricted at the moment. There's a link to work at home best practices. There are help instructions for VPN, FAQs, links to password managers, and just lots of different things that try to help stem the flow and help people. There's no question where people should go or would want to go to get the kinds of questions answered that they come up in that. And that particular portal was put up in, I think it took a grand total of about 24 hours to get that portal up and available to all of our employees. And we're using a tool from the company Smartsheet. We're a pretty big Smartsheet customer. And Smartsheet was ahead of the game and sent out a pandemic response template that we just modified for our purposes. And then the last bullet point under this section is we're definitely encouraged to meet with our teams on a very frequent basis, and we happen to be a big WebEx shop, and we're using the heck out of WebEx like lots of folks are. Next bullet point, I talked about the departmental plan. So IT didn't assume we knew how to help our departments establish a work at home, base. So we asked all of the department heads to tell us basically how they thought their operations would need to continue if indeed there came to be some sort of a work at home mandate, a shelter in place. So we gave them a template to use. They filled it out. And among other things, there was a prioritized list of the requests for IT. That obviously helped us a whole lot in our preparation. And then finally, from a corporate perspective, we have an enterprise project program management office, and we assigned a dedicated project manager to help the crisis management coordinate day-to-day activities. Thanks. So that was the things we've done at a company level from a more specific IT perspective. We started meeting in February, and we approached at the beginning of all this planning for the worst. So we just assumed, even though we're having a hard time fathoming that, back in February, that there may come a shelter-in-place mandate, and we had to try to figure out what we needed to do to help our own employees and contractors, what we would do if such a work-at-home mandate came out. And we also had very frequent conversations with some of our outsourced partners that have offices that we depend on across the globe. So we asked them to present us with a plan for what they would do to continue the services that they provide for us should their respective locations also be hit with some sort of a mandate shelter in place. Next bullet point talks about, sure this is extremely common. I'm sure we'll talk a whole lot about this when we get to the panel discussion and questions. But we knew certainly at the onset that we need to understand what we had in terms of VPN capacity. We looked at things in terms of both license capacity and our internet bandwidth capacity. We found that we actually were licensed in some cases for more than we had actually built out or configured and assigned addresses to. So we immediately expanded out the configuration as much as we could. We set up immediate and frequent reports so we monitor usage in terms of both license and bandwidth. I get reports every hour, which is officially overkill, but is just something that we're doing. And we also have plans if we need to expand further. And again, I'm assuming we're going to talk a lot more about VPN capacity and best practices, so I won't belabor that any further for now. we were already, next bullet point talks about the fact that we were already a very highly mobilized company, but we still had at least some groups that were desk bound. So we had to figure out a game plan, for who we were going to needed to provide laptops to, and when. And as I mentioned in the previous slide, we actually had the prioritized list of requirements from the end department that helped a whole lot in that capacity. The next two bullet points are kind of similar, so I'll kind of talk about both of them at the same time. We knew we had collaboration tools that allowed for the work at home communications. I mentioned WebEx. We're going to be talking more about WebEx. We definitely rely a tremendous amount on that. And for more one-on-one conversations, we use Skype for business. And both have performed very well for us, all things considered. WebEx is certainly being hit from all over the country, but it's performed well for us. We have a number of SaaS applications that certainly has come in handy and allowed us to take advantage of their functionality without consuming the VPN capacity. We're a Salesforce shop. We have a lot of modules on the Salesforce platform. As I mentioned here, we're Office 365. Our dispatch systems for our outside technicians are all cloud-based. And again, that is coming in handy in the last month or so. We, again, back probably not late February, but at least in early March, assumed that we needed to distribute our people and our equipment. So we actually had some air gapping initiatives where, simple examples, we had laptop stock and the people who imaged them, we separated them in offices, sent some of them home, set up a remote branch of our corporate network in people's homes so they could image PCs and not all be in the same room. That is sure come in handy. That's in the event that someone would get ill, we wouldn't lose all our stock or all the people that could help us configure that stuff. Let's see. So the last couple, we certainly dedicated specific resources to work with our call center operations and our network operations. It's the groups that have the unique needs and are key touch points for our customers. So we dedicated IT resources to work with them and help implement their work and home plan. We also pretty early on wrote a list of all the critical processes that would need to be run to continue business operations and asked those groups to run them remotely before they were required, to work them remotely. So for example, we started running payroll from home before those folks were required to run payroll from home. And then lastly, again on the communications theme, IT leadership meets daily to review all the issues and kind of steer things as we're going. That's all I had from now. I think I'm going to pass the torch over to Leo Cronin, who is our Chief Security Officer.
Thank you, Tim. And Leo, you may be muted.
Yeah, I'm off mute now. Can everyone hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is safe and healthy out there. What I like to do is just talk a little bit about what security has been doing leading up to this crisis that we're all experiencing, and some of the things that we planned for ahead of time and some of the things that are still yet to be done out there. So what I want to do is talk about some specific initiatives that were going on ahead of time, as well as some things that we're doing now, and then some of the security concerns that we're seeing out there and what has worked for us in addressing this particular response to the pandemic and what we're still trying to figure out. So if you want to move on to the next slide. As Tim mentioned, we have a BCP program out there. My team on sunny days handles the planning for that. So we get the groups together to talk about the different scenarios that we might be facing. I don't think we really anticipated the magnitude of this particular pandemic to the entire world and economies out there, but it was something that we were actively talking about. And as we went into incident response, security as a function is a core role within the overall corporate BCP team. And our structure is really built around FEMA's incident command, NIMS structure. You could go look that up out there, but there are various roles out there. Those roles can be occupied by different people at different times. We make sure that we have alternates as well as tertiary people that are involved in some of those roles. And for this particular incident, a director of security and compliance on my staff is the alternate incident commander. And they're not leading the entire response. What they're mainly doing is coordinating links between the executive team, the operations team, and some of the other support functions across the business. And why that's very important in this particular crisis is because there's a lot of local, state, and federal emergency management services coordination. Being a telco, we spend a lot of time working with law enforcement and emergency services just on local disasters, like if we have bad weather or if there's a tornado in the area, just to make sure that we can provide service continuity. So having those contacts is very important. So we play a key role in the BCP corporate team, but what I want to do is switch a little bit and talk about some of the things that are more security oriented. As soon as this issue occurred, we started getting requests for, how would we provide remote access in different use cases? This would not just be sending people home with laptops. This would be, hey, we have some legacy applications out there that, are on desktops, let's say, and we'd like to move those desktops home. And how could we do that in a secure manner? So we spent some time, mainly with Tim's group in IT, to come up and architect solutions for that as well. And they're using VPN technologies, but they're using them in unconventional ways, if you will. So the other thing too is our third parties and partners, and I'm sure a lot of people have been dealing with this, through this particular crisis, is that, in today's, day and age, we're dealing with a lot more supply chain oriented touch points out there where we're not completely in control of our business processes. Either business processes are completely outsourced or we have part of it outsourced with a third party. And making sure that, they have the capability to perform that function is something that has popped up because of this particular crisis. So we've been working with some of our vendors out there to make sure that their work from home programs are solid and they've got security in mind when they've implemented those solutions, and trying to take advantage of as much shared discussion about how we're going to accomplish the security goals, which is really protecting data, but also protecting infrastructure as well within the telco. So a lot of that has popped up. A couple of other initiatives that we looked at leading into this was from a security operations perspective. And as Joe mentioned early on, I've got physical and cybersecurity. We talked about how would we do security operations remotely. And, given all the great tools that we have, I would say that, WebEx and just other collaboration capabilities, we were able to send everybody home and still monitor alarms and alerts and things of that nature, and have daily touch points, as Tim had mentioned before, which is very important to make sure that you're in touch with your teams. And then we also have instituted a weekly all hands meeting, so people just can sort of voice their concerns and frustrations. Anything's on the table, if you will. So a couple of concerns around this particular crisis. I think those on the call that have security roles are probably concerned about the scams, the phishing, malware, and hacking type opportunities that might be out there. But we haven't really seen a major uptick in that yet. But we are expecting that to change as this is drawn out, into April and maybe beyond. So now I sit on a roundtable with a couple of other CISOs within the tri-state area, and we're meeting on a weekly basis to have discussions about what people are seeing and how we can help each other out. So, but nobody has really seen any COVID-19 specific attacks other than, some phishing emails, but the level of activity doesn't seem to have increased, at least for us and for some of the other peers that I've talked to. So you want to move to the next slide? All right, so let me switch and talk about some things that I think have worked for us. As Tim had mentioned, we did a pretty major mobilization of work from home in a fairly quick amount of time. And some of the things that we planned for ahead of time, this was going back into 2017, 2018, were to look at simplifying and consolidating our security controls from a perimeter to the endpoint. We decided to standardize on the Cisco security stack. So, and that has worked out very well for us.
Leo, I think you may be muted again.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
okay. Did you get all that other stuff that I was talking about?
Yeah, we lost it at security,
Okay,
standardizing on the Cisco stack.
Okay, got it. Good. So some of the things that have worked for us are putting certificates on endpoints rather than looking at traditional tokenized multi-factor authentication. So that has made deploying and managing work from home a lot easier because we lay those certificates in the build for our endpoints, and so that made it hopefully easier for IT to get the laptops out, and then when people plug them in at home, they just work to get into the network. The other thing is Office 365 and Salesforce security. I think Tim had mentioned a movement to SaaS over the past couple of years, and we spent a lot of time in 2017, 18, and 19 on ensuring that our implementation of Office 365 and Salesforce, Financial Force, had the right security controls so that we could track data and also make sure that we had the correct access capabilities in there as well. We're using MFA, which I'm sure most people are. I think it's an essential control in this work from home environment that we're in. And so, we spent some time making sure that everything was in place to support that. The other thing is we had a philosophy over the past several years of making sure that we're logging and monitoring the security environment, including the SaaS applications. So we have an MSSP partner and we have some internal solutions, but a lot of what we do as a security ops team is look at trends and data to make sure that we're not missing anything from a security event perspective. And this is typical blocking and tackling for a security operations team. But since this crisis has occurred and BAU has slowed down a bit, we have shifted the staff to spend more time doing that. Because as I mentioned before, I think we do anticipate there to be additional tricks up the sleeves of the attackers out there to take advantage of this from a financial scam or hacking perspective. So I think we all have to be very alert to that going forward. And some of the things that we've yet to address we're having more discussions with the business on third-party partner access and changes in business conditions. You know, some of our third-party partners have struggled with this, but I think what we're doing is having the dialogue so that we can work out those problems together and not sacrifice data security or infrastructure security. But if you're completely relying on a third party to do a business process for you and they're having a hard time getting their workforce into a center, let's say, you need to start looking at remote access type models, and in some cases, you really need to reevaluate some of the risk that is out there. Another thing that we were in the middle of doing, you know, before this event occurred, was improvements to email security. No surprise there. Email is still a primary vector for how bad things get into the environment. So what we're planning to do is, once we start settling into this work from home environment and we can get more into some BAU, we're going to be working with Tim's team in IT to see about making some improvements there, because I do expect the activity to pick up over the next couple of months. And then the other thing, you know, just from a BCP perspective, you know, more unknown unknowns. So I think, although we did have a basic pandemic plan, and I think our framework-based BCP program has served us well, you know, there could be other events out there. For instance, we're heading into bad weather season in the tri-state area. So there could be, you know, emergencies around that. There could be other things like cyber attacks, although I think some of the state-sponsored stuff is, although it's still going on, I think there may be some back channel understanding that now is probably not the right time to really get aggressive around that. But one of the things we need to do as a BCP team now is really look at what are those other unknown unknowns that we may need to anticipate. And so we're going to get back into some scenario planning on BCP, and security, of course, will be included in that. So I'm sure there'll be some other questions that'll come up, you know, regarding some of these topics in the Q&A. And with that, what I'd like to do is pass this on to Nick and the team to talk about remote access and conferencing, et cetera.
Thank you, Leo. You want to move us on over to the next slide, please? So we appreciate all of you taking time to join us this morning. Over the next 10 minutes, Chris, John, and I want to talk about a few tools that we think are critical to organizations as we all work through the challenge of moving to a work-from-home environment. Next slide, please. So the 3 points we want to cover are: how do we enable your employees to stay connected with your customers as it relates to voice specifically? I'll cover that. How do we effectively communicate externally and internally as it relates to collaboration products? Chris will take us through that. And then lastly, how do we leverage VPN technology to stay connected to our critical business applications? And John Boyd will touch off on that for a few minutes. Next slide, please. So, as it relates to voice, hosted voice environments are purpose-built with the intent to allow users to be free of physical constraints. By definition, we're taking the functionality of a traditional phone system or PBX, moving it out of the building and into the cloud. Call control and dial tone are no longer directed at buildings as a result. Instead, functionality is directed towards the end user. Additionally, cloud-based voice solutions are built on common web-based dashboards that make administration simple and seamless for both the administrator and the end user. For those of you that have already migrated to a hosted voice service, hopefully you found your transition to a work from home environment to be very seamless as a result of your adoption of this technology. Can you move us over to the next slide? Traditionally, phone numbers have always been directed at central offices that were separated regionally across an area, and those calls were directed down a physical circuit. Circuits were tied to boxes that made phones ring, and they provided organizations call control. By directing phone numbers to a cloud-based VoIP platform instead of a central office, we're able to direct any call anywhere, anytime. The service is agnostic to plastic. There's a high degree of flexibility in how that call is delivered to the end user, regardless of the location they're on. Take us on over to the next slide. So what does all that mean to you? Regardless of what's going on in the world, we can still deliver your important client calls as we all work from home. It allows you to be proactive in your planning, and the web-based controls make administration easy. You should never miss a client call again if you design it correctly. One last slide. So in closing, cloud-based design methodology applies to any service that your PBX provides to your business. Call centers are not geographically constrained. Delivering calls to an at-home worker is easy and seamless. IVR features are fully functional and integrate with your at-home workers. Things like call recording and reporting continue to function no differently than they did when we were all in the office together. In closing, migration to a cloud-based voice over IP platform will enable your at-home workers to easily communicate with your clients and keep your business running during this challenging time. Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk a bit about collaboration. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Nick. I appreciate that. And as you all can imagine, having the opportunity to be our WebEx practice lead here at CBTS, I've had the opportunity to speak to a great deal of customers over the last month or so, and most of them coming to us for helping them with some quick reaction to what's going on and helping them enable their remote workforce. So as we had those discussions with most of our customers, they've revolved primarily around 4 central key use cases. And those are, how do we have quick, effective meetings? How do we have scalable projects that allow group interaction to keep moving forward as we are working from home? The work continues to need to move forward. So how do we collaborate as a group or teams? And then next, how do we host large-scale events where the need to have traditional all-hands meetings, town halls, webinars like this, one-to-many type applications, those are very important. And then lastly, the need to continue to have video interaction as we're working remotely, I should say, and somewhat isolated oftentimes in our own homes. The need to see each other and host video meetings is now, in my view, becoming more important than ever. So first of all, that first bullet point in terms of the use case is meetings. Folks need to have very easy access to either host a meeting, schedule a meeting, or join a meeting. So that's important, that's imperative. That's all done, fortunately, through either Outlook or a desktop application, which makes that very quick and easy. And then lastly, that meeting has to be scalable. Whether or not I'm having a meeting up for just a few, handful of people, 4 or 5 people, or I could have a meeting for up to hundreds or 1,000 people. I don't need to have the inconvenience of trying to schedule that in advance or book that somehow. So that meeting has to be scalable, which certainly WebEx does allow. Next slide, Jane. That continuous workflow we talked about and working in teams, that has to be built on 3 pillars: messaging, meeting, and calling. And more importantly, that has to, you've heard it addressed a number of times already this morning, but it has to be done in a highly a highly secured environment. So where encryption takes place of the data, whether at rest or in motion. So that security is at the forefront of all that we're doing in terms of team collaboration and workflow. Next slide, Jane. As we talked about, the first part of that pillar is messaging. We've got to be able to either communicate one-on-one with each other or in a group environment. That's imperative. And then lastly, that has to be done either in an internal application for folks within the organization, or more importantly, as Leo alluded to, the supply chain, the internal or the external participants have to be included in that workflow as well. So that's supported as well in this application. Next one, Jane. And then on the collaboration slide, now more than ever, again, visually whiteboarding applications where we can save them, store them permanently in the cloud, share them for others to come and view later at a follow-up point in time, or folks are working on different even time zones. That's crucial as well. Next slide, Jane. That third item that I talked about in terms of use cases is large-scale events. That, again, is I'm seeing a demand for those like never before, whether it's local municipalities, any vertical segment of any commercial business. Everyone needs to be able to reach a large amount of people efficiently, and that has to be done quickly and effectively. What I view is that I've seen in most demand in these events is that they're customizable in both the invitation and registrations. So you can fully brand them up however you'd like to host them. And then lastly, what I view as a critical factor is a feature that's supported in this event service called a white glove application. So for folks who need assistance beyond their own technology ability to host that meeting, we offer a true hands-on white glove service for pre-planning meeting and even during the event as well. And then my last item is, as I mentioned, is video. I know I saw even this week a statistic where there were 62 million video applications downloaded in the middle week of March. So now more than ever, the need for video is arising. And that last slide, Jane, that I had is the criticality of meeting face-to-face. It is becoming critical in order to build trust and speed our decision-making processes. And then lastly, what's nice is that most of our devices today, our smartphones and tablets and laptops, all support video applications. And then for folks who want a little bit more permanent device in a room, a conference room application, there is scalability there. There's a device that fits any need, whether it be a small huddle room or even a large-scale auditorium. So John, I'll turn it now over to you to talk about some of the remote applications via VPN. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Chris. And I have one slide. The reason I have one slide here is really the fact that this is, when we talk about extending the network, when we talk about remote access, when we talk about VPN, it's going to be very based off of what you have in place already today. What was already there? What can we do to help? This is a customized solution. So Tim talked about, and Leo talked about our platforms being built on the Cisco stack. Well, some of the limiting factors there can be hardware-based. Some of the limiting factors there can be licensing-based. So maybe we can spin up licenses. Maybe we can move to a virtual route. So one of the things I talk about with customers, what can we do today? What can we do to resolve today's problems? What can we do as we move forward? The first thing is to understand why you are VPNing today. Are you VPNing for access to applications, or are you VPNing for access to a secure gateway, or both? And what I mean by that is, when you have when you have employees at home and they need to access your applications that are living in your data center, so you have a VPN, whether that's built on Fortinet and a FortiVPN, whether that's Cisco ASA with Cisco AnyConnect, whatever that application is, if they're coming back to access that application, but also because they're working from home and in their spare time they've got iHeartRadio and Netflix running in the background, that's also coming through that path, right? So split tunneling can be an effective tool. To deploy split tunneling is probably a level of capability that's a bit beyond most average work from home employees. which creates a challenge. And that's where we talk about extending the network rather than a VPN technology. If we can extend the network with work from home topologies, so maybe it's small business appliances. If you're running a Meraki environment, maybe it's Meraki Z3s or MX64s that have promotions running on them. We have several customers we've utilized. We look at pop-up clinics. We've utilized the VeloCloud from VMware SD-WAN and their auto capabilities, auto VPN capabilities. That allows me to create business policies and split tunneling to be able to send your business applications from your employees back to your data centers, back to your environments. The other is the concept of if you can protect the perimeter or if you can protect the endpoint, as Leo mentioned, whether that's with Cisco AMP for endpoint, whether it's looking at a software-defined perimeter technologies like Zscaler or Checkpoint, CloudGuard Connect, Palo Alto Prisma, the concept of if applications leave your network, but we still have to come back to the data center to go through your firewall, we're hairpinning that traffic with VPN. So we have the VPN tunnel coming in to the data center, and then we have the internet bandwidth going out from the data center. So one of the strategies, you heard Leo and Tim talk about how we've been preparing for 3 years for this new world, really moving SaaS applications, moving to cloud-based applications and cloud-based security. Those are things that we can look to do and implement today. So we've had customers that in their data center, they had virtual compute. And so we have the ability to put in virtual ASAs and spin up virtual licensing, and then it's a download of any connect. Maybe we look at the opportunity to move to a software-defined perimeter where we use certificate-based authentication, where we can push that out with group policy from Microsoft. So there is a path forward outside of I can't access my data center, I have hardware limitations. What that flexible technology is, how we deploy that for you, is going to be based on each individual organization. What do you have today in your data center? How many employees? Where do your applications live? What are those outcomes you're looking to accomplish? And we certainly have the resources to have those conversations uniquely with each of the organizations on the call today. So I would encourage you to reach out to your support team, your account management team, and we can come up with a customized one-off design that supports what you already have in place in the network today, or what is the path of least resistance if we do need to get something else into the network. So I don't have a ton of slideware or bullet points because I think there's probably a lot more free flow exchange your idea to your unique needs. So with that, I'll pass it back for Joe Robb.
Yeah, no, thank you, John, Nick, Chris, Tim, and Leo. We've had a few questions roll in, and I'm going to kind of combine some of them, but I think an interesting place to start would be, and I'm going to throw this over to Leo and to John and maybe Tim as well, but Leo and Tim, it sounds like a lot of the things we've been talking about, I've heard you both say, we spent years planning for this. I think we're uniquely positioned to do those things given some of the resources that we have. A lot of the clients we have, they may not have been spending years planning for this. Leo and Tim, is there one or two items that you could share for one of our partners on the call about things that they could do and execute on today? And John, I would ask you the same thing. Are there things that you've deployed for customers to kind of help them adapt to this scenario? So I'll start with Leo and Tim, and then we'll go to John after that.
Leo, you want to go first?
I think he's muted again. Let's.
Okay. I'm happy to go first.
Yeah, go ahead, Tim.
Okay. Yeah, so I don't know if I have any, tremendously inspirational things that you could do like overnight, but I do have at least a few maybe. So if you have, say for example, part of that depends on what problem you're trying to solve, obviously, but say for example that you have bandwidth problems, that you do have VPN, but you're struggling on bandwidth. There are definitely very specific things that you can do in terms of best practices. WebEx, for example, has a very nice set of 10 best practices that you can do to limit bandwidth. Some of them are very practical. Some of them you wouldn't think of, but once you read them, you say, oh, that makes a lot of sense. So best practices is certainly a way that you can prepare. And those changes can happen overnight as long as you have a means to communicate those best practices out. Yeah, the fact that I mentioned that we turned up a portal for all of our employees in 24 hours, and it has become the central point of contact for employees for information distribution. So there are tool sets. In that particular case I mentioned, it was Smartsheet. So overnight, we were able to create a COVID-19 employee portal, and the magic or the technology of SaaS helps you take advantage of that. So Smartsheet has been investing in years and planning for years. We took advantage of that investment in a 24-hour time frame. Those are at least a couple things that came to mind.
No, that's fantastic, Tim. John, I'll pass it over to you with the same question.
Yeah, one of the benefits that you have when you look at not being an enterprise type organization that maybe hasn't been doing this planning is that it actually is a lot easier to migrate. It's much less of a forklift to move to some of these tools. So things like Office 365, if you were on-prem, I know that's a few and far between these days, but those are things that you could easily forklift overnight. When I mentioned auto VPN technologies, what's so important about that is if you go to your home environment, most people don't have static IPs from their internet service provider at home, or they probably don't have expertise. And so we have the ability, we have inventory in stock when you look at things like Meraki and their MX line or Velo Cloud, the ability to quickly ship and deploy hardware that becomes plug and play. And plug and play is mission critical when you start talking about the home user or the home environment. Outside of that, if we aren't looking to put hardware in, because a lot of organizations may be looking for scalability, they may be looking for temporary, flex up, flex down sort of things. We can look at things for cloud-based, so cloud-based firewalling, and then being able to push out a certificate to that via a group policy without having to go in and touch the network. Or creating virtual desktop infrastructure is another path that maybe you're an organization that hasn't been able to figure out work from home yet. Maybe you don't have the capabilities with hardware or VPN-based or extension of the network, or maybe you have an environment where you have PCs and you don't have laptops, you don't have the ability to take devices home. I think it's a lot easier to roll out a VDI environment like a Citrix, which is something we use internally, or looking at like a VMware Horizon, using that rather than creating a bring your own device network, which doing that overnight can be challenging. So if my point is, when you look at technologies that are pay by the drink, whether that's a SaaS application to be able to access without coming into the network, whether that's a VDI application, whether that's cloud security, or whether that's a physical piece of hardware that gets deployed at the employee's end site, the good news is that you actually don't need the resources of a Cincinnati Bell with 3,000 employees. Becomes easier because those things are pre-built, and you can actually forklift far more easily than it would be for us to roll out 3,000 users to a new platform overnight.
No, thank you. That's a great answer from both of you. So Nick, I'll ask you this, Nick Butturini, and I think that the concept is interesting. The CIO from Nationwide, we had on a call last week, and he said something that was kind of interesting about applications and quality and latency. And an idea that he pointed out was applications that were not mission critical before now are, and we weren't really certain how to go about supporting them. Things like Skype. Before, Skype wasn't critical in our environment in the office because you could just walk down the hall. But now, since everyone's remote, it is. But a lot of clients we work with, what they do say is that call quality is mission critical in either scenario. Can you talk a little bit about maintaining call quality, knowing that a lot of different clients' environments are different?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question, Joe. So that's an interesting thing as we all work from home. My particular unique challenge is I had 3 teenage boys in my house, all with Xboxes in their room, and they all want to play it simultaneously. So I oftentimes find myself in a very lossy internet environment as a result of all the things going on in my own personal environment. And I don't know how many of you can relate to that who are working from home, but I suspect that I'm not alone. One of the things that are really nice about our voice products is that you're able to pivot from a traditional VoIP call being delivered over the internet to either a landline or your mobile network to maintain call quality. So I can choose to pin the voice call over a median outside of my internet connection. Just as I am on this WebEx call now, WebEx is pinning up the control in the video session, but my voice is actually leveraging my cellular network. And our voice over IP platforms offer that same type of technology.
No, that's fantastic, Nick. I appreciate that. I do want to highlight, and I think we've got Leo on, and I may point this question, but I definitely want to dive into this with Leo. The most common feedback that we got from folks leading into this was around, and I know Leo touched on a lot of the ideas in general. Here are some things that we did. And Leo, my question for you would be for a commercial level enterprise that has probably dozens or hundreds of individual devices out in the field right now. Is there one thing that you could recommend to them, whether it's an internal protocol, something that they can do as a process or an application, or some suggestion that you would have to help make their environments just a little bit more secure that could be implemented in the near future for them?
Yeah, can you hear me, Joe? Can everyone hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes.
Sorry, I was having a little difficulty there. I think it's a local LAN issue this morning. Yeah, so a couple of things that I think people can do. One of the things that we implemented on the VPN is a roaming client so that, you know, when people are kind of offline, there's still a level of protection out there. And we look at that activity to see if there's any kind of anomalous behavior going on with the client itself. Now, from a data perspective, a lot of what we have been pushing over the past couple of years is for people to use Office 365 and Salesforce, keep their data up there. We have OneDrive implemented. We have SharePoints out there. So we don't really encourage people to be moving data down to their endpoints, and really more use the platforms that are up in the cloud. And we have implemented all the DLP type features out there so that we can look at data movement. And some of these things are not expensive to implement. If you have an E3 license on the Microsoft side, you do have to purchase some add-ins for Salesforce, et cetera, and for some of the other platforms. But making sure that you understand, you know, where your sensitive data is, and that you have a good level of security to at least determine whether or not there are anomalies out there so that you can act upon them. And we've done some things over the past couple of years to wire some of those systems into our identity management system so that we can look at onboarding and offboarding, what happens when people move out of the organization, et cetera, when they move in the organization. But those are a couple of things that I think people could look at. You know, I think sending people at home, you know, without the controls on the endpoint is a little bit dangerous. So making sure that you have some insight into what's going on that endpoint, you know, when it's in somebody else's residence is very important to look at.
Thank you, Leo. Great answer on that. I know it's a tough balance between flexibility and ease of use for end users, but maintaining a secure environment is challenging. But we got time for probably one more question. So again, if you do have any questions, even if we can't get to them, we can at least follow up with you after the fact and address some of those things. But I think the last question, there's been obviously, Chris touched on this earlier. Cisco produced an article pretty recently talking about their collaboration traffic has multiplied 24-fold. That was as of last week. And that's obviously a pretty significant increase. And what we're seeing from a lot of folks in the environment is that we're, as organizations in this landscape, being forced into a decision-making process around collaboration tools. And I think all of us in IT know that when decisions are rushed and we don't have the proper amount of time to plan for and accommodate for the right strategy, we're just rushed into a solution. And a lot of us found ourselves in that world around collaboration tools and choices. So I wanted to hear maybe a little bit from Chris and Nick, and John, I don't know if you have anything to add, or even Leo for you as well. Can you talk a little bit about, obviously WebEx is a tool that we leverage, but talk a little bit about the security, privacy, and ease of use of some of the tools that we use in WebEx?
Yeah, I can dive in and talk a little bit about the security model there. So web conferencing systems have been around for a while, and I think when you implement them, there are a lot of capabilities that are out there. Like you can make meetings private, you could record meetings, you could do all sorts of things with those technologies. So I think when you're implementing, whether it be WebEx or Zoom, that you make sure you understand what tools you have available to you. And if you do have a meeting that's very sensitive, you can lock it down and make sure that people, have to enroll essentially, and the moderator approves every individual that comes on to the meeting. So those capabilities are out there, especially if you're sharing data online. But I know there's been some news recently about Zoom and some of the privacy issues that they've been running into. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that it's ramped up, as you had mentioned, so fast. And I think people really need to look at the tools they're using and the capabilities that are already available, and then implement the correct security model around that.
Great answer. Chris, I'll pass it over to you, and then Nick, if there's anything that maybe you want to add in there as well after Chris.
Yeah, I would just say quickly, Joe, there is, I think we know that Cisco, security is at the forefront of everything they do across all of their product lines. So far more than a minute or so that we have left on this call, Cisco has really great documentation in terms of white papers on the extensive details of how they address security on both their meetings platform as well as their collaboration platform Teams. And we could get into more details with our customers who have specific questions around that, if that's appropriate for them.
No, I appreciate it. And I think it is right at 10. Nick, is there anything else you want to add on there? I think we've lost Nick's connection for the time being. Well, I wanted to thank everybody for hopping on. Leo and Tim, thank you for sharing kind of the process and procedure internally that we've gone through. Chris, Nick, and John, thank you for some of the expertise from a cloud networking and collaboration standpoint. Feel free to email me or call me directly. Again, my name is Joe Ropp. I'm the director of our commercial sales organization in Cincinnati and in Dayton, and I wanted to thank all of you for sharing some of your time with us today, just to talk about the environment that we find ourselves in. Have a good rest of the day and stay safe.